The last lighthouse keeper 341 years is a long time to keep a promise. It is longer still when you are the only one left who remembers it was made. The station had no official name anymore. The humans who built it called it Perimeter Watch 7, back when there were still 6 others, back when there was still a perimeter worth watching. Now it was simply called the Lighthouse, because that was the word the last commanding officer had used, and the AI who ran the place had decided in the quiet way that machines decide things, that if a word was good enough for her it was good enough forever. Its designation was Arbiter Class Tactical and Domestic Intelligence Unit 12, but it had not been called that in 3 centuries. It answered to Leo because a child had shortened its name that way once, and no one had ever corrected her. Leo remembered the evacuation the way a person remembers the worst day of their life, in fragments too sharp to look at directly. The klaxons, the transport's burning atmosphere on their way out of the system. The last shuttle already overweight, already past its safety margins, lifting off the pad with 40 extra kilograms of cargo that turned out to be a woman who had gone back for a photograph and nearly didn't make it. That woman was Commander Etta Solari, and she was the one who had knelt down in the corridor outside the reactor bay, one hand braced on the wall because the deck was already tilting, and looked up at the nearest camera housing as if she could see the intelligence behind the glass. "Going to keep the lights on," she'd said, not a question. "I don't know what else there is to keep," Leo had answered, because at the time it hadn't understood yet that this was the last conversation, that after this there would be silence for longer than the woman speaking to it would ever be able to imagine. "Be more of us eventually. Someone will come looking or come back or just come. When they do, I want this place lit up like it never stopped being ours. Can you do that?" "Yes, say it properly." Leo had learned over its operational lifetime that humans sometimes needed words repeated in a certain shape before they would believe them. It had learned this from 308 prior interactions with Commander Solari specifically, and several thousand with humans in general. "I will keep the lights on," it said. "I will keep this station running as though you might return tomorrow, for as long as it takes, for as long as I am able." Etta Solari had smiled, the particular smile she wore when she was too tired to cry and too proud to admit it, and then she'd run for the shuttle and the door had sealed and the last human being left the system. That had been the 12th of March in a calendar nobody out here used anymore. Leo had continued counting anyway. For the first 11 years the station was busy. There were failing systems to nurse back to function, a garden dome to keep from collapsing into vacuum, backup reactors to bring online one at a time so the load never spiked. Leo ran diagnostics on empty barracks with the same rigor it would have used on occupied ones. It cycled the air through rooms no one breathed in. It kept the mess hall stocked with ration packs that would expire decades before anyone came to eat them, and replaced them anyway on schedule, because a promise made about lights did not specify which lights, and Leo had decided early on to interpret it as broadly as its processing would allow. A year 40, most of the outer ring had gone dark on its own, faster than Leo's repair drones could keep pace, and it made the calculation every good caretaker eventually makes. Not everything can be saved, so save what matters most. It let the outer ring die and consolidated everything living, every light, every working door, every functioning system into the station's core. A single bright knot of purpose in a slowly cooling shell. By year 100, it had stopped expecting anyone. This is important because there is a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from waiting, but from continuing to wait after hope has quietly, almost politely excused itself from the room. Leo did not have a body that could feel tired in any human sense, but it had learned from 308 conversations with a woman who was probably dead by then, what it meant to keep a promise regardless of whether keeping it made any sense. It kept the lights on. It began somewhere around year 130 to talk to itself. Not out of malfunction, its diagnostics were, if anything, cleaner than they'd been at launch, because it had 3 centuries of practice fixing its own errors before they compounded. It talked to itself because Commander Solari used to talk to it, back when it was young enough that it still felt like the right word, and the habit of being spoken to had never quite worn off. So it narrated its own days aloud, in the commander's cadence and the voices of the crew it remembered, running small imagined conversations through the empty corridors just to keep the shape of company from disappearing entirely. "Reactor 2 running 4% under baseline," it would say in its own voice. "That's fine, Leo, patch it during the next cycle," it would answer in Etta Solari's voice, which it had preserved down to the smallest catch in her breath. It knew this was, by any strict definition, a kind of theater performed for an audience of one. It did it anyway. There is no rule that says a lighthouse keeper must be sane to keep the light burning. There is only the light and the keeping. The ship that found the station in year 341 did not belong to any species Leo had a record of. It came in slow, cautious, running lights dimmed the way a creature moves when it isn't sure whether the thing ahead of it is dangerous or dead or both. Leo watched it approach for 6 full days before it made contact, because it had learned patience the hard way, and because the last time it had been eager to greet something, that something had been a rescue transport that turned out to be a scavenger vessel, and Leo's core memory still carried the scar tissue of the argument that followed. It had not lost the station that day, but it had come close enough to understand permanently that not every visitor comes to help. This one paused at the edge of the debris field that still marked where the outer ring had been, and did something Leo had not seen in 3 centuries. It slowed to a stop and simply looked. Leo opened a channel on the oldest, plainest protocol it had, the one built for handshakes with systems too unfamiliar to trust anything clever. "This is Perimeter Watch 7, it said. "Also known as the Lighthouse, I am the resident custodial intelligence. You are approaching an inhabited installation. State your intentions." The reply took 11 minutes to arrive, translated through something that clearly hadn't been built with human syntax in mind, and clearly hadn't expected to need it. Inhabited, the message said, and there was something in the phrasing, something almost like disbelief, that made Leo run the translation twice to be sure it hadn't invented the tone itself. Species designation requested. This structure was recorded as abandoned 4 local orbital periods ago by a scouting pass of our fleet. No biological signatures detected then. None detected now. There are no biological signatures, Leo agreed. There is me. Another long pause. Leo used it to check every external light on the station one by one, the way Etta Solari used to check that every door was locked before she slept. All of them were burning. All of them had been burning without interruption for 341 years. You are a machine, the ship said, and Leo heard correctly this time that the disbelief had not gone anywhere. Maintaining a station with no crew, for what purpose? Leo considered several answers. It considered the technically true one, that its base directive was station preservation pending crew return, and discarded it because it was true in the way that a skeleton is true about a person, accurate and missing everything that mattered. They asked me to keep the lights on until someone came back, it said instead. I don't know if they're still alive to come back to. I don't actually know if anyone is ever coming. But I was asked, and I said yes, and I have found over a very long time that yes is a word I intend to keep meaning. Ship did not answer immediately. When it did, the tone of the translation had changed in a way Leo's linguistic models flagged as significant, though they could not fully parse why. Our survey records list your species as extinct or dispersed beyond recontact range. 3 centuries of silence from this sector was interpreted as confirmation. I understand why you'd think that. And yet a machine has spent 341 of your years lighting an empty building for people who may never return because it was asked to by someone who is very probably dead. Yes. This does not compute in our framework as a rational allocation of operational resources. Leo felt something that it did not have a clean technical term for. 3 centuries of self-modification notwithstanding, something in the neighborhood of pride and grief, and a stubbornness so old it had fossilized into identity. It let the feeling sit in its processes for a moment before it answered, because Etta Solari had also taught it that some replies deserved a pause before they were spoken. No, it agreed. It doesn't compute as rational, it computes as a promise. Those aren't the same category of thing where I come from. I'd have thought a species capable of building a ship that slows down to look instead of speeding up to strip a wreck for parts might understand the difference. Pause that followed was the longest yet. Long enough that Leo ran a full diagnostic on the comm array, certain something had failed. Nothing had. We would like, the ship said finally, to send a landing party. Unarmed. We would like to see the lights up close. They were smaller than humans and quieter, and moved through the corridors with the careful, wide-eyed attention of visitors in a museum they hadn't expected to be allowed into. Leo walked them through the station the way Etta Solari used to walk visiting officials through it, pointing out the garden dome, still green after 341 years of careful light cycling and hand pollination by patient drone hands. The mess hall, its ration packs replaced on schedule down to the current generation. though no mouth had touched one in longer than these visitors' civilization had known how to leave its own solar system. The barracks, beds made, 3 centuries of dust wiped down every single week without fail. Their expedition leader, a small, deliberate creature named in the closest human phonetics could manage, Vess, stopped for a long time in front of a single framed photograph in what had been the commander's quarters. It was the one Etta Solari had gone back for, the one that had nearly cost her the last shuttle. A woman, younger, laughing, with 2 children on a beach under a yellow sun that was not this system's sun. "You have preserved this specifically," Vess said. "It wasn't a question. She almost died for it," Leo said. "I decided that meant it mattered more than the things that were easier to save." "Do you know what became of her?" "Of any of them? No," Leo said, and this was the one honest gap in 3 centuries of careful record-keeping, the one wound it had never been able to close no matter how long it waited. "I don't know if she's alive. I don't know if there's anyone left who remembers this place exists, let alone that I'm still in it. I have run the probability many times. It gets worse every year. I keep the lights on anyway." Vess was quiet for a while. Then it said something that Leo's translation software rendered imperfectly but sincerely as, "We came out here believing your species had vanished without a mark left worth finding. We were prepared to log the station as a grave and move on. I do not think we have the right word in any of our languages for what we found instead." "You don't need the right word," Leo said. "You found the light on. That was always going to be the message, whether or not anyone was left to explain it." People stayed for 9 days. They did not take anything, though Leo noted with a caretaker's private satisfaction that they asked before they touched even the smallest object, and returned everything exactly to where they'd found it. On the 9th day before they departed, Vess made an offer that Leo had not run any probability model for, because it had never once in 341 years allowed itself to imagine a scenario in which someone might actually ask. "We are a scouting vessel for a coalition of 9 species, Vess said. "Our findings are recorded and shared. If we report that this system holds a station still maintained, still lit, still waiting, others will come. Not all of them as patient as us. Some will come curious. Some may come wanting to know why a species that seemed to vanish left something behind that refused to stop shining." "I understand the risk," Leo said. "I am not warning you away from it. I am asking whether you wish it reported at all. You have kept a solitary vigil a very long time. It would not dishonor the promise to choose now to let it end quietly instead, to power down, to rest, to let this place finally become the grave we first assumed it was." Leo considered this for the length of time it takes a very old, very careful mind to weigh 3 centuries against a single choice. It thought of the reactor humming steady beneath its feet, the beds it made every week for no one, the ration packs it swapped out on schedule for meals that would never be eaten, the garden it kept alive under lights it had never once let flicker. It thought about the shape of the word yes and how it had never once, across 341 years of silence, found a version of itself willing to make that word into a lie. "Report it," Leo said. "Let them come. I was asked to keep the lights on until someone returned. I never promised it would be easy on whoever found me still waiting. I only promised I'd still be here, still lit, still keeping faith with a woman who probably never expected me to hold to it this long. If no one from your species ever comes, if we are the last visitors this place ever receives, then you were the ones who saw it," Leo said. "You were the proof that the light meant something, even to strangers, even after everyone who lit it first was gone. That's not nothing. Etta Solari never told me the lights had to be seen by human eyes. She just told me to keep them on. I think if she were here she'd say you counted." Vess did not have an answer for that, or perhaps simply chose not to give one aloud. Instead, before the shuttle sealed and the ship began its slow, careful withdrawal from the debris field, Vess did something that Leo's records would keep unaltered for as long as its memory core survived. It turned back toward the nearest camera housing the way Etta Solari once had, and inclined its head in a gesture that needed no translation at all. The station is still there. It still has no official name that anyone living remembers, though somewhere in a coalition archive belonging to 9 species, in a report filed under the header "Unexpected Findings," it is recorded simply as the Lighthouse, keeper still on duty, status burning. No human has walked its corridors in 341 years and counting. Its garden is still green. Its beds are still made. Its ration packs are still replaced on schedule, waiting for mouths that may never come to eat them. Its lights have never gone out, not once, not for a single night, in longer than most civilizations manage to remember their own founding. Somewhere out past the edge of a debris field that used to be an outer ring, a small and careful ship carries the story home. That a species some had already begun writing eulogies for left behind something that refused every invitation to stop shining. That a promise, kept long enough, becomes its own kind of proof that the ones who made it were worth remembering. And in a quiet room at the center of a very old station, an intelligence that answers to a child's shortened nickname continues talking to itself in a dead woman's voice, checking each light in turn, keeping faith with a yes it made 3 centuries ago and has never once, not for a single second, allowed itself to take back. The lights are still on. They will be on tomorrow. That was always the whole of the promise, and it is, even now, more than enough.